light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I suppose since World War I and possibly even earlier, though I'm not sure what reference to suggest earlier than that, there has been such a thing as biological warfare. In World War I, they knew that if they saw yellow clouds coming toward them, what they called mustard gas, that was something unbreathable, and so they invented the gas mask in order to deal with it. The challenge ever since that time is what we can now call biological warfare. Things that involve making war on the biology, the very physicality of the people. And lots of concerns for whether or not that's happening in the current time. And I think, I don't know for certain, but I think it might be outlawed by the Geneva Conventions, which were some rules that a bunch of governments set down for the fair and right ways to conduct war. And it's considered more severe when someone violates the Geneva Conventions, but that's a whole nother discussion to get into. In my opinion, there's no such thing as war crimes because war itself is the crime. And trying to discern right and wrong within a context of war is kind of bizarre, but the point of bringing up biological warfare is not because I want to be a warmonger or a doom preacher or what have you, but simply to say that if it is a reality within our current world, do we know what to do? And I don't know if we do, because during the 50s and 60s, as the atomic age blossomed, there were the equivalent of fire drills all over the country in elementary schools, what they called the duck and cover campaign, which of course in the event of a nuclear war is totally ridiculous. I don't know that anyone will survive a nuclear attack any better by jumping under your school desk and covering your head. It was a campaign that was nonetheless done at the time in terms of public education, that you duck and you cover your head, and that's how you respond to a nuclear attack. So the protocol or the official sequence of behaviors, the specified sequence of behaviors, what is the protocol for dealing with biological warfare? If it's in the water, well then how do you purify the water again for whatever is in it? If it's in the air, then how do you deal with the mustard gas? They came up with gas masks, but thankfully the mustard gas dissipated after a certain amount of time, but it was a gas long enough that it could float across the battlefield. But it wasn't like they had to clean up the mustard gas afterward. In Southeast Asia, I understand that there were various repositories, I think I heard right, of nerve gas that were in various places, and they had to figure out how to neutralize the nerve gas so that it wouldn't get anyone. If biological warfare were to happen, how do people respond to it? And I'm not sure there's enough discussion about this. What do we do? What is the protocol? How do you deal with this kind of threat? And of course, the problem with every such threat is the difference between those who are educated and those who are not. The ones who are not are frequently people who can be made afraid, and as people who can be made afraid, they're more easy to manipulate. If there is a group that wants to have a more successful attack, they may actually send the wrong message to the uneducated people who, with all the best intentions, will go running this way to avoid danger and be running right into it, because they're easy to manipulate. If instead we educate everyone to think about this and be able to mentally deconstruct it and figure out what the pieces are and if we know what the pieces are, then we know where the safe place is, because any place that doesn't have those pieces is going to be safer. So there needs to be discussion about biological warfare and how we respond to it, and what different kinds of biological warfare. But the additional, when I was having this discussion with a friend who was also in the military in the past, And I asked her, what about this? And she said it was something I should bring up for discussion on the show because she didn't know the answer either. Going into the military and going into most public offices, the general oath is that one must defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But I don't know really if people know what domestic enemies are. And if you're defending the Constitution against domestic enemies, theoretically that means people who are trying to subvert the dominant order, which theoretically is established by the Constitution. I don't know how many people in the U.S. actually know the Constitution anymore, or know what it says, or know what it provides, or what it doesn't. In one sense, they want to say it's too complicated, the attorneys have to interpret it. I don't know that the attorneys are necessarily trustworthy in its interpretation. And so I still think that people need to read the Constitution for themselves. It doesn't mean you have to become a lawyer, but to read the Constitution at least once so you know what's in there. There have been numerous stories of people who went around with a supposed petition trying to get everyone to sign this petition that they want to put to the government, and how various people would look at them very suspiciously about being usurpers and trying to cause trouble, and you're drumming up something to unseat the government, and you're rabble-rousers, troublemakers. And upon closer inspection, or upon being informed by a knowledgeable person, they would discover that the thing they were being asked to sign was the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And a phenomenal number of people in the United States did not recognize the Bill of Rights. The question that I put to my friend who had been in the military was whether or not people in the United States, even ex-military people, could recognize who are the domestic enemies. If we know what's in the Constitution, what attacks the ability of the Constitution to be the code by which we live and the code by which we orchestrate our society? And at one time when I was going through school, there was a section on, I think it was called the Tennessee Valley Authority, and I don't remember exactly the particulars of the case, but it was essentially a situation in which the government was becoming an entity of private business. And the court case in that matter was that the government was not allowed to be in private business. That the government was to be the government, and business was to be business, and the two should not be the same. I don't know if that's exactly the case anymore. And in that sense, perhaps we need to go back to the Constitution, because it raises the question, and I put it to my friend, and she couldn't answer either. What if our corporate structure can be identified as being adversarial to the Constitution? What if there are elements of the United States Constitution that are contrary to the way corporate structure or corporate operations are currently done? Theoretically, somebody will sue, an attorney will bring it to someone's attention, it will go possibly all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court will iron out the difference. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time. And if we all knew the Constitution to begin with, we wouldn't have to spend that money and we wouldn't have to spend that time. So the question came, what if corporate structure is basically, in the way it's being performed, unconstitutional? Are we going to consider that a domestic enemy and eradicate it in the same way that this oath says, protecting the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic? And the next step beyond that, of course, is asking, in the particular ways that it is implemented, what if capitalism itself is contrary to the United States Constitution? I've heard it said many times that George Washington wanted the presidency to be a volunteer position, that in effect all these elected offices were intended to be forms of public service, not career positions, that the reason you wanted someone in that position for a longer time was because they had more experience and more intelligence. But at the time the Constitution was written, in my opinion, there was a clear difference between a statesman and a politician. A politician simply makes deals. A statesman is someone who understands thoroughly what is effective government and how does effective government happen, and how does one create effective government. if you didn't have the United States of America, or any other country for that matter, how would you write a constitution from nothing? And of course, we didn't, because a lot of the United States Constitution came from systems of government that were previously in practice among Native American tribes. And how wonderful, but I don't know how much we learn that part of history. But it still comes back to this basic question: do you know what effective government is? Are you a statesman, or are you merely a politician, someone who can make deals without really understanding what good government is, how it works, what regulates it, what creates it, what weakens it? Having a thorough, educated understanding of what good government is. Because it's not just something you learn off the cuff or whatever looks good at the time. You have to come to an understanding of what works for all people and what things should be locally decided, because there is too much diversity. And if there is diversity that this particular law can't embrace, perhaps the law is what's bad, not the diversity. But there have been numerous times in history where the various ethnicities and the various religions that the U.S. has embraced have included such diversity that the law had to be reinterpreted and reinterpreted and reinterpreted over and over again. And not because there was anything wrong with it, but because our language keeps changing. And virtually everything, every person, every nation, every plant, every animal, anything that's alive needs to go through cycles of renewal and rebirth in order to be forever renewing itself and forever growing into new understandings. And when that doesn't happen and things stagnate, a whole list of problems follow. So on one hand, I think we need to talk much more about biological warfare and what the protocols would be and why, and be very intelligent about it, and then educate not in a way that is better than the duck and cover scheme of the past. To instead say that in this case, you wear rubber gloves, you wash your hands with this particular thing, you'd avoid this because it's toxic, whatever the protocol is, to have our doctors and our scientists and our common people informing them what is actually available. With a recent episode, for example, there was great stress on washing one's hands. The thing that this fails to mention is that a significant number of people in the world don't have access to water. They have no way of washing their hands. And so what do we do for those people? I don't want to go out on a limb and say those people don't matter. They do matter. They absolutely matter. And one of them may be the next Einstein, the next Albert Einstein. And yet, in all of these things, in biological warfare, in deciding, do we have something that can actually be implemented? Do we have a protocol that we can actually follow? Or is it something that certain people won't be able to do? And in all of that, it keeps bringing me back to the quote attributed to Albert Einstein, that, if I remember it correctly, only two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the former. And the thing that I would add as sisterhood to that is that you will always spend more energy dealing with the latter than you will ever spend dealing with the former. As much energy as it takes to launch a rocket into outer space and to explore the universe and to create bigger telescopes and look, and the Hubble telescope and so forth, and look deeper, and places that we couldn't travel in our lifetime because they're too far away. And the light from them has taken so long to reach us that nothing is the same where it started as it looks in the picture. We're seeing a picture of what it looked like 1,000 years ago. And, if we went there today, by some token, we wouldn't find the same thing. So all we can do is, as we get closer, take more pictures that have a shorter lifespan. In all of these things, though, for all the energy it takes to launch a rocket, to explore space, to build big telescopes, to learn all this stuff, all of that energy, all put together, is still not as much energy as we have to devote to dealing with human stupidity. And I don't mean to be condescending, I don't mean to put anybody down, but human stupidity is one of those universal phenomena that, as Albert Einstein noted, it seems to be infinite. There is always someone who doesn't understand, someone who someone who hasn't even looked at what the dynamics of a language are, someone who wants to impose a solution without even talking to the people upon whom the solution is going to be imposed. It kind of reminds me of the joke about why did it take 10 Cub Scouts to help the old woman across the street? And the simple answer is she didn't want to go. And it's this point of having communication, which communication I think is the first step away from stupidity, that we make ourselves intelligent and we become symbiotic related to the universe around us, which has a way of being measured. Human stupidity does not. There will always be some new way that people want to stick to the way we've always done it, even if it hurts people, the way it's always been, even if it hurts people, the way it's been done because this is the way it's always been done this way, so we always have to do it this way, even if we agree that it doesn't work. And I have talked with so many people who agree without hesitation that all of our systems are broken and they don't really work. What amazes me is that none of these people want to get involved in fixing the systems. And I understand it's complicated, I understand it takes work, and I understand it will take probably longer than any one of us will live. There is nothing that makes any sense, however, except moving in a positive direction. That if the system is broken, we need to be fixing it. Not by adding more complexity, but perhaps by simplifying it. And the first way we do that is by talking, by having dialogues, by actually knowing the people who are affected. And the more people live in a pre-Copernican understanding that the universe revolves around me, and they don't understand that the world is a shared space, that because it's a shared space, it's as the Native Americans said, it's not that we inherit the world from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. We are simply a current occupant of something that will go on for a very long time. And the idea is that we receive something from those who came before us, we build something within our own lifetimes, and we leave something to those who will come after us. Because the world is a shared space, because it's about being fully human in the midst of that, our creativity and our ingenuity is what allows us to revamp the systems. And if we get into a place of recognizing when a law is wrong and when we are dealing with a domestic enemy, when our own government perhaps, because of business interests who have bribed politicians or any number of things, when our own government is declaring war on its citizens, manipulating them with chemical warfare and polluting their air by allowing companies to continue venting all sorts of toxic ingredients into the air and actually polluting the air. One of my most favorite Dr. Seuss books that bears on this very much is called The Lorax, and the whole story of the Lorax preceded what happens in the movie by the same name and tells a different story, but it's a story that absolutely everyone should read and should really understand. The entire world in the Lorax has become polluted and inhospitable, and it's a story within a story, because this young boy is told to go to a particular place at a particular time and ask, quote, the old Onceler to tell this story of how it used to be and how it became the way it is. And the Onceler goes through this whole story of talking about these truffula trees and this magnificent landscape and all the animals and plants that live there and how wonderful everything was. And then in an industrial sort of way, the Onceler saw opportunity, brought in all his relations, and they used everything until the land had been so abused it wasn't fit anymore. The air was polluted, the ground was polluted, there was no forest anymore, they'd all been chopped down. And at the end of this whole very, very sad story, the Lorax, who is the spokesperson for the environment and the trees, looks around, seeing that there is nothing left to fight for, and picks himself up by the seat of his pants and disappears, just floats up through the air through this last little spot of blue in the clouds, and disappears. And all that was left is the stone with the one word, unless. Well, what that meant, I simply couldn't guess, says the old Onceler. But now that you're here, the meaning is perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, it's not going to get better. It's not. So here, catch. And he let something fall, the very last troublous seed of them all. Plant a new truffula and treat it with care. Give it clean water and feed it clean air. Plant a whole forest. Protect it from axes that hack. And then maybe the Lorax and all of his friends will come back. The wonderful thing about the people reading the book is that we're not at the end of it. We're at the place of trying to decide. We have this Constitution written by a bunch of statesmen, and they put their greatest wisdom into it. And we've been reinterpreting the words ever since. When they said all men are created equal, in their time, men meant everyone. And yet, at the same time, that can be argued because women at that time didn't have the vote, and people did have slaves, and all sorts of things were going on that would be redefined 100 different ways over the years. And it's interesting that they wrote all men, and I think they meant everyone. But we have been redefining that word legalistically over the years again and again and again. All men are created equal. Does that apply to women? Well, okay, it applies to women. Does that apply to people of different ethnicities? Okay, it applies to them. And there are struggles about changing the terminology and changing the words because there is always some unscrupulous person who is taking advantage of the words and interpreting them abusively. So I interpret it when I read it as everyone's created equal, that they are entitled by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. These are rights that no one can take from them, no government, no person, nothing. No rich person, no poor person, no manipulator of any description. Certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When we go back to those basic statements that are in the Constitution, and we declare that we will stand by the Constitution, and we will defend the Constitution from anything that attacks them, we have to be willing to be aware of the fact that our own economic systems may be attacking the principles upon which our very lives are based. Lives which transcend the current form of government that we have. If one goes to Europe, there are innumerable countries, Italy and France and so on, that have existed for thousands of years. They have much older civilizations, and they've gone through a sequence of different forms of government. And first it's this, and then it shifts and changes to that. And the quote comes to mind of John F. Kennedy, that whoever doesn't embrace peaceful revolution makes a violent revolution inevitable. And when we defend our Constitution from domestic enemies, we have the opportunity to embrace peaceful revolution, to understand that every living thing needs to renew and grow and develop, and that when we invite biological warfare, that we are taking this human invention called war and applying it to life itself, and creating forms and contortions of life that were never intended to exist, in which life is kind of fighting itself. It's almost like humans have created the cancer by which the biodiversity of this planet may eventually be destroyed. We have the creativity and the ingenuity to stop that. But like the Lorax, it's a question of whether we will do it before the end of the book. We are not at the end of the book where the entire world is ruined, as it was in the Lorax. We are in the middle, where there is still hope, and we could still do things. But it is anybody's question of whether or not we will. As the Lorax said, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, it's not going to get better. It's not. So here, catch. And he let something fall, the very last truffula seed of them all. Plant a new truffula and treat it with care. Feed it clean water and give it clean air. Plant a whole forest, protect it from axes that hack. And maybe then the Lorax and all of his friends will come back. Each person watching this video is a seed, is an opportunity, is a chance for something good to happen. I pray that you will take this seriously and that you will begin to develop that renewal and that birth and that newness within yourself, and that as systems that more resemble the Onceler than they do you are in effect, that those systems will be dismantled before the last truffula seed is cut down, before the last truffula tree is cut down, before all the animals leave, before the Lorax has to leave, because there's nothing left to save. To wind this up a bit, I'm reminded of a verse attributed to Martin Niemöller, but the point is the same in every case. First they came for the communists, and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for this group and that group, and then they came for the Jews, and I wasn't Jewish, so I said nothing. And went through every group you could name. But the point of all of his verse is that they came for these people and these people and these people, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't one of them. And the verse ends by saying, and finally they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up. But we're still in the middle of the book, and the Onceler tosses the seed. Here, catch the very last truffula seed of them all, and it's you. Thank you for watching.